You're listening to Bark and Wag's 15-Minute Vet Talk. Each week, your host, Polly Requa, interviews veterinarians and individuals in the pet industry from across the nation answering pet questions. Bark and Wag podcast is produced weekly for your enjoyment, and show notes can be found at barkandwag.com under the podcast tab. That's BARKNWAG.com. Please remember to subscribe to Bark and Wag 15-Minute Vet Talk.
Thank you for listening to Bark and Wag 15-Minute Vet Talk. Bark and Wag is dedicated to protecting our dogs through advocacy, education, and supporting like-minded dog lovers by selling custom pet products. Saving lives by selling collars, scrunchies, and swag. Please check out Bark and Wag's website, barkandwag.com. That's BARKNWAG.com to see the awesome merchandise. Bark and Wag collars and leashes, collar covers, and decorative bandanas are perfect for your pooch. For the owner of the house, we have t-shirts, sweatshirts, long sleeve shirts, hats, and even coasters. We are expanding monthly, so be sure to check back. We love pooch ideas for podcasts and merchandise too, so send an email to polly@barkandwag.com with your suggestions.
You're listening to Bark and Wag's 15-Minute Vet Talk, and I'm your host, Polly Requa. Today we're talking to Dr. Susan McMillan, owner of Vet-to-Pet Mobile Veterinarian Service in Burlington, Vermont, to learn more about heartworm. What is it? How do dogs get it? And what can we do to prevent heartworm positive test results? Welcome, Susan.
Hi, Polly.
I wanted to talk about heartworm because I give the dogs a heartworm pill every month.
Right.
How do dogs get heartworm, and what can it? I know it can kill your dog, but what are the signs? And I just wanted to talk to a vet about what we should look for.
So heartworm is a parasite, and it's transmitted by mosquitoes. And it really has been, there are heartworm positive dogs in all 50 states. So there's definitely parts of the country where heartworm is way more common, but almost anywhere in the country your dog is possibly exposed to heartworm. So it's they get heartworm when a mosquito that's heartworm positive comes around and bites your dog. And when they call it a blood meal, and the mosquito feeds on your blood. And when they take a blood meal, they at the same time transmit this parasite into your dog. And the larvae develops in your dog, and it actually turns into these worms that actually live more in the lungs and in some of the vessels, but also in the heart. And obviously having a heart full of worms is a really bad disease to have.
How do you test for heartworm?
These days there's a pretty simple blood test. Anytime if you've been to your vet with your dog, they talk to you about doing heartworm test. They might call it a SNAP test. These days it's also called a 3DX or a 4DX test, because there's a test now that tests for heartworm, Lyme, and 2 other tick-borne diseases. So it's a combo test that you may get. But it's a really simple blood test. They literally only need 3, 4, or 5 drops of blood, and it's a really it's a good test. It takes about 10 minutes at your vet clinic, and most dogs that get tested will come up negative. But especially if you live down south, or if you've adopted a dog that was a rescue dog from down south. Even here in Vermont, we're seeing a lot more heartworm because we're bringing these dogs up from down south that have heartworm, and it's now apparently in our mosquito population, even here in Vermont.
And so I've heard of puppies getting heartworm.
Yeah.
And adult dogs can obviously get heartworm, but if you're giving the monthly pill, they can't get it, right? That acts as a preventative. Okay.
The monthly pill kills the immature larva. That if your dog has been bitten and is infected, that monthly preventative kills that. So it actually works kind of retroactively against whatever your dog has just been exposed to in the last month. So a puppy can be infected, an old dog. Cats can be infected too, so we shouldn't forget about cats. And then if your dog was bitten today, the solution would be to get him on that heartworm preventative. But once that infection has become more mature, then the treatment becomes a lot more aggressive and a lot more expensive and definitely more, challenging for the dog. So your best bet is really to prevent the infection from becoming mature, which is why you give Chuck a monthly, that little chew tablet once a month.
Okay. And our vet recently said, I think it was actually our vet in Illinois, and I think it was a shot, but it's for 6 months or a year now you can do it.
There is a injection out there now that some clinics are using. We are still not using it yet because, as you know, we do a lot of low-cost medicine, and the injection is more expensive. But yeah, it's easier for owner compliance because you don't have to remember that once a month chew tab, which we all seem to have a hard time remembering that on the 5th of every month. I try to tell people, like, if you have a mortgage or you pay the rent, do it on the 1st. When you pay your mortgage, give your dog the heartworm tablet. Or when you pay your rent, give but compliance is hard. We all forget.
Well, HeartGuard has an app, and it will send you a calendar reminder.
Yeah.
And it keeps popping up until you feed the dog.
Oh, seriously? Okay. So it kind of harasses you into doing it.
Yeah.
Well, and it's a chew tab. There's several different brands out there. They're all, I think, pretty well flavored. So, I think most dogs like it. So it's really just a treat. It's not like a big ordeal most of the time. You just give it to them, and most of them just chew it up, and it's gone in a split second.
Okay.
And the thing is, those chew tabs also deworm your dog against roundworm and hookworm every month. So you get kind of a side benefit of getting rid of some intestinal parasites at the same time.
Okay, and that we need for our lab, who seems to eat garbage around the block. Yeah.
Right.
And humans cannot contract heartworm disease, can they?
No, I think that there may be some very uncommon, really rare cases of humans getting heartworm, but at least at this point, the same mosquito that bites us, for some reason, the heartworm doesn't survive in us. It can survive in your cat, and cats are even more challenging because we don't have a good treatment for cats, where if your dog is positive for heartworm, we do have an effective treatment. We used to treat heartworm disease basically with arsenic. Okay, gosh. And so this stopped right before I became a vet. So I think it must have been maybe in the mid-90s that they got the safer heartworm preventative. But basically, you gave the dog arsenic, and I think you just hoped that you killed the heartworm before you killed the dog.
Oh, wow.
So our treatment has become way more advanced. A treatment is a lot safer. It's still a pretty drastic treatment. So, your best bet is just to do the monthly preventative. And these days, the recommendation really is to do it year round.
Okay.
Because mosquitoes do, every once in a while, mosquitoes can, flare up. At least here in Vermont even, we get a warm spell, and all of a sudden you might find mosquitoes around.
Yeah, anywhere that there's water.
Yeah, anywhere there's water, and it really does only take one mosquito. So even if you have what you consider a mostly indoor dog who mostly lives in the apartment, they can be exposed to that one mosquito that can cause a pretty devastating disease.
Okay. And what are one last question. What are the signs? What if you did have a dog that was heartworm positive, what would be the signs? Do they go to the bathroom with worms in them, or what?
No, you won't see anything intestinal. You won't see anything that way. Basically, you'll probably see either just a sick dog, which is unfortunately the only sign we see for a lot of diseases, just generic dog doesn't feel well. But it is worm in their heart and lungs. So the first signs you might see can be a cough or cardiac related. So if your dog suddenly has exercise intolerance or has slowed down or has a cough that you can't explain, especially if you're in an area that has a lot of heartworm disease, then one of the things that we'll first test for is heartworm, because you want to find it really quickly. There's a group called the American Heartworm Society, and if you go on their website, you can look at a map that shows you where there's a ton of heartworm. And like I said, it is in all 50 states, but we see a lot of it down south and in different pockets around the country. So some people probably live in areas where maybe their vet doesn't talk about heartworm a lot, but in other areas, if your dog isn't on heartworm preventative, you are nuts. You're just nuts, because you're just asking for a really serious infection.
Okay. Well, we certainly appreciate you coming on and talking to everyone about heartworm, and we look forward to having you back in the future.
Thanks, Polly. It's always fun.
Thank you for listening to Bark and Wag's 15-Minute Vet Talk. If you like what you just heard, we hope you'll pass along our web address, www.barkandwag.com, to your friends and other pet owners. Have a pressing question for a veterinarian? Ask your question at barkandwag.com under the podcast tab. This has been a KFR production. Join us next time for another edition of Bark and Wag's 15-Minute Vet Talk.